All right, welcome to another meeting of Beyond the Book Club. This month's author is Judith Arnold, and she is talking about her book, If Only. If you want to talk about the book, Judith, go right ahead.
Okay, first, I know a couple of you from previous book club gatherings. Obviously, I'm here under my pen name tonight. So if you're looking at me saying, wait, she looks familiar, but anyway, yes, I write as Judith Arnold and tell you a little about If Only. I don't know how many of you might have read the acknowledgments at the end. Very few people do. That's, they're just there to fill up space. But if you did read it, you would know that I have an If Only house. I jog past it every Wednesday. I'm very OCD about my jogging route. So each day I have a different route. And on Wednesday, I always pass this house that when my husband and I were house hunting in this town 33 years ago, we really, really liked this house a lot. It's nothing like the house in the book. It's not a Victorian. There's no turret. There's no big porch. It's a very symmetrical, white colonial. I loved it. And just like Barry in the book, my husband said, yes, but it doesn't have central air conditioning. We cannot buy this house. And so we bought another house that had central air. And I jogged past this house, and for years, before If Only was even a little glimmer in my eye, every time I passed that house, I'd always think, well, if only we had bought that house, how would our lives have been different? My kids would have grown up in a different neighborhood. They would have gone to a different primary school. In particular, my younger son, who is my more gonzo child, the house we did buy, his best friend lived across the street. His best friend was nothing like the character in this book, but they had their tiffs and their struggles. They're still best friends today as adults, but there were times when I just used to think, oh, if only Sam didn't live across the street. If only we'd bought that other house, Greg would have had a different best friend and blah, blah, blah. But the story kind of began to evolve in my head because I was thinking I've reached an age in my life, like as Ruth has in the book, where you start wondering if only I had made a different choice somewhere along the way. You look back on things and I don't know how many of you might be familiar with a strange cult movie called Brazil that came out years and years ago. I don't remember much of it, but I remember the opening premise. It's set in this sort of semi-apocalyptic future where everything is bureaucratically controlled. And at the very beginning, a housefly gets into some machine and lands on a piece of paper and changes the entire course of the society. And and as in the book where I talk about that myth about the butterfly flapping its wings and that causes a tornado halfway around the world, I was intrigued by this whole idea of how small things, small choices, sometimes seemingly inconsequential decisions can completely change the trajectory of your life. And that was sort of the genesis of this book. But of course, to write a book about that would have been like a dry philosophical thing. So I wrote a story about a family and all the tsures, if you're familiar with that term, the Sturm und Drang. I can throw all kinds of foreign languages here. All the ups and downs and upheavals. I tend to like to write books in which there's lots of trouble, but everyone sort of has to laugh about it. That's, there's always kind of an undercurrent of humor despite what's going on in the story. I was also playing a little bit once the story started taking place in my head. Once Ruth moved in with me, I always sort of feel like my characters are, coming and taking up residence in my house or in my head, more likely in my head because they blabber and yammer all the time and give me headaches. But I started thinking about the James Thurber book, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and how Walter Mitty has these fantasies in which he imagines an entirely different life for himself. His his fantasies were always, that he was some great hero solving the problems of the world or whatever. But I was wondering, what if a kind of an older woman had those kinds of fantasies? What would they be like? And as I was writing the book, in fact, I actually removed a couple of the fantasies that were originally in there because one of the fantasy episodes had to do with if only Ruth were tall and thin, how would her life have been different? But I realized that the fantasies all had to be something Ruth had control over, something she made a decision, and that decision led her to the life she was living, and the fantasies, the life she would have lived if she decided differently. If I had a decision, I would be tall and thin with really long legs, but that was not my choice, so I could not make that choice. But so every fantasy she has was based on an idea that if she had made a different choice, she would have a different kind of control over her life, because as she's living her life, she sort of feels like she's surrounded by chaos. She can't control everything. She tries to. I think there are hints throughout the whole book that she's trying to, and she should be able to, because she's the glue that holds this whole family together, as women, at least women of certain generation, often are. But darn it, her son goes and has an affair, and her Maddie, what can I say? Maddie just does everything. Maddie is her gonzo child. Having raised a gonzo child, I understand Maddie to some extent. She loves her husband, but she can't really control him either. He's got his own agenda, and when he wants to lose his temper with his daughter, he blows his stack, and she has to go and shut herself up in a bedroom just to get away from it. And I guess finally, many women of my generation, certainly, probably many women of every generation, have that one first love, and they always if they know perhaps logically this would have been a disaster if I'd stayed with this guy. There's something about that first love that's usually pretty disastrous, but the passion is there, and the excitement is there, and the novelty of the relationship is there, and they look back. I will confess, I Googled mine. I found out if I had, and again, the book is not autobiographical, but yes, he did try to get me to drop out of college and run away with him. And I gave it serious thought because, I was so in love with this boy. But I said, no, I really want an education. If I don't want to lose my scholarship. They'll and I said no, and I wept for days. And I wrote a lot of songs. That's another thing I had in common with Ruth. I wrote a lot of very emotional songs, heartrending songs that I wept as I wrote them. I wept even more as I sang them. And then a few years passed, and I met the guy who has now been my husband for over 40 years. And, it's worked out really nicely. But out of curiosity, I did Google that first love. And much to my amazement, it turned out that he became a psychology professor at the University of Michigan.
Wow.
I mean, when I fell in love with him, he, as my mother used to say, he looked like Jesus Christ. He had long hair and a big beard, and he was my hippie lover. But anyway, so I was just playing with a lot of these things. A lot of them, from what I've heard from, I have done a book club with a group of my college classmates. Actually, they have formed a book club, and they chose If Only, and they all sat there saying, "Oh my God, this happened to me. This happened to me." So I guess I touched on some universal issues in this book. I hope I touched on them in a humorous way, in an interesting way. And
Well, what I loved, what appealed to me when you pitched this story was, first of all, it is a completely universal thing. Maybe everybody in this group hasn't done it yet, but you will come to a point where you start having those if only conversations. What I loved about this, though, was that you allowed her to come to terms with the decisions that she made that kept her on the path that she was, which I think is not the way this, it's not the Walter Mitty approach. You know, when you first mentioned this book to me, you said, well, you know, it's like a Walter Mitty kind of thing. And it's actually not, because the Walter Mitty thing is just pure fantasy. And what I thought was so good about this, and so valuable about this, was that she parses every one of those if onlys and accepts why she stayed on the course that she was on. And that's a really valuable thing, I think, that goes beyond just the entertainment value of the book or the literary value of the book, but, you know, but as an instruction tool, you know, the idea of, you know, okay, you can, you know, fantasize as much as you want, but why don't you analyze why you made those decisions? Because, you know, there was a good reason, and it does make you who you are now. And I think that, and obviously the way the book plays out, you know, goes right toward that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say first, congratulations. And I think I'm the monkey in the wrench on what time this thing goes on, because so I apologize for that. And I wanted to drop in quick before I go to work. But what I was fascinated by, and I'd love to hear about this, is, you know, I think if you write, you're familiar with the concept of sort of taking an event that you have some memory of and saying, well, what if I invert that? You know, but this whole book was an exploration of an inversion, but like Lou says, you know, ultimately coming to terms with, you know, the path that I took was just fine, you know. So I mean, and I think it's a blessing and a curse to sort of try to deconstruct how did she do this, but I had great fun with that whole question. And I would love to hear more about how that worked itself out when you were actually writing the book. Boy, I had something. Oh yeah. The only other thing I had is, you know, despite our gruff exteriors, guys too remember the first love. You know, in fact, I'm in quite good contact with mine, which is just bizarre, you know, 34 years after the fact. So there you go.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, mine has proven to be unsearchable.
Might have to hire a detective,
which I'm taking personally, frankly.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of my husband's first loves found him, and she lives a life of woe, and he's like her only friend now. So
Oh, no.
she emails him constantly to tell him about her husband and her problems and her health and her this and her that. And he comes away from his computer and gives me a hug and says, "I'm so glad I married you." So I'm fine with that. But
That's right, it works.
yes. You know, as far as I sort of, the book kind of, I'm kind of a pantser as a writer. I don't plan too much out in advance. And I will admit, I knew going in that Kyle Jarvis was going to come back into Maddie's life. I knew that was, I mean, I had a few things I knew, and I knew that at the very end of the book, Ruth was going to go off and find Danny. But I didn't know what was going to happen when she found him. I did not even know until I was about halfway through the book that he ended up running a hardware store in Vermont. I had no idea. I thought he went out to California. He had to tell me, again, as I said, the characters come into my head and they explain to me, this is what you know, I take dictation basically a lot of the time. I wish I could tell you that I structured it in a very conscientious way. I will say that one fantasy that was very brief and that Lou commented to me this fantasy is so much briefer than all the other fantasies. Why is it not longer? And that was the fantasy of if only she'd gotten her tubes tied and Maddie was not born. And I could not make that a long one because that was just such a horrible thought for a mother to say, I wish my child was not born. I assume that many mothers do think that in passing sometimes, you know, when the kid is just being really obnoxious or horrible, or, you know, the baby is waking you up for the fourth time at night screaming in the crib. My firstborn was all of 2 days old when I went into his nursery after the third or fourth feeding and said, shut up, and then thought I was the worst mother in the world and someone should just, you know, take custody of my child and lock me up someplace because I was such a horrible person. So yes, we do think these things sometimes, but to actually imagine, to slip into a fantasy in which one of our children did not exist, had never come into being, I think would just, I said, that cannot be a big fantasy. That is just too horrible. And I convinced Lou of that. But I think that the fantasies sort of, they materialized as I was writing the story of the family, of the actual family, as the singers were going through their things, as you know, Noah was separated from his wife, and as Jill became more and more officious, and of course she has the worst kids in the world, which I had fun with, but you know, or as Maddie was getting deeper and deeper into her stuff, and as Rainey was getting deeper and deeper into her stuff, and the conflicts between them, and how Ruth was, you know, again, she has these feelings. She loves her granddaughter, but she really wants her granddaughter out of her life to an extent too. But anyway, so it was the family story sort of dictated where the fantasies were going to be and what they were going to be. I didn't know I was going to write the skiing fantasy until the whole ski vacation, and Rainey got dragged into that, and then I said, oh, you know, this could be interesting. So I wish I could tell you, Greg, that I structured this so carefully and so methodically, but it sort of came together organically, I guess.
That's the best way.
Yeah. The editor isn't so sure that's the best way, but the writers are, yes.
Yeah.
Also got some questions here for all readers. And the first one you kind of already brought up a little bit, was Ruth Singer is many things: a dreamer, a musician, a teacher, a retiree, a wife, and a mother. And she remains inextricably entwined in the lives of our loved ones, even though she keeps claiming she wants to be done with them. And can a mother ever stop being a mother? And should a mother ever stop being a mother?
I think probably a mother can't stop. At least a not psychotic mother. I think it might be some sort of diagnostic psychosis or something if a mother can't be a mother. But I have adult children now. They are grown up. They are on their own. They have careers. One of them is married. They're doing fine. And yet I cannot stop being their mom. I stifle myself a lot. I bite my lip a lot. And sometimes they make me really angry, and sometimes they piss me off, but there's a connection there that I think is just unbreakable. I may only be speaking for myself, but most of my friends who are mothers sort of feel the same way, and our children, sometimes they can disappoint us, they can hurt us. But I had a difficult relationship with my mother, but she was still my mother, and there was a real strong connection there no matter what. So that said, though, I think a lot of, just as when the baby wakes us up for the fourth time at night and we go in and say, shut up, I think there are a lot of times we just want to be done with it. We just don't want to have to deal with this all the time. It's, it's almost like a white noise. It's always there, whether you want it there or not. I can't say I have like a really strong psychic bond with my kids, and that may be because they're both sons, and it's a different relationship between mothers and sons than between mothers and daughters. But I could always sense when my mother was going through something, even if I hadn't talked to her. She could sense with me. It was a little scary at times. There were sometimes I was going through something I didn't want her to know about, and suddenly she'd call me and say, "What's going on?" It was like, ooh. She used to call it the witchy thing. But so I don't think we can escape it once we're mothers. I've read articles about women who've given up their babies for adoption, and they still sort of feel that tug and that tie. So yeah, sometimes it's a burden that you really don't want to be carrying with you, but you can't shed it. So
well, and Ruth demonstrates it really well, because she's like, motherhood does not in any way end for her after her kid turns 18.
No.
If anything, it just keeps going even longer. And obviously her situation's a bit different from other situations where the kids actually do leave the house fully and their grandkids leave the house fully. But in her specific situation, she couldn't even, not even just stop being a mother, but stop being a mother who's kind of like mother hen, as in like, because she's living with them, like looking over everything, as opposed to when the kids fly out of the coop, you can't exactly look over them per se.
Yeah, and I think also, this is just a sort of a side note, but I wrote this book during the first year of the pandemic, when a lot of families were coming back together to get to live, so like writing the dynamics of having Maddie and Rainey living back at home with her. And obviously Rainey's been living there her whole life pretty much, but having a grown daughter move back in, that was something that a lot of people were going through during that year. And so, it was certainly something, my kids did not come home to live with me, but I knew people who this happened to, and there was a lot of news about it in the media. And so, it was something I figured it was an interesting new dynamic that a lot of people were suddenly dealing with too. So, right now, actually, my younger son is going to lose his apartment. It's a long involved thing. His landlady loves him, but so he's scrambling to find a new apartment or possibly buy a condo. But I said, look, you have till the end of May. If it doesn't work out, you can come and live with us until you find a place. It would be plan B or plan Z probably in his head. But we may be in that situation again. It happens a lot more often these days.
It's actually crazy. I've researched the statistics for that before, and between the ages of 18 and 34, about 50% of young adults live with their parents. I don't know about right now exactly, but like a year ago, that was the statistic, which is insane, that high of like number of people.
I know when I was 18, I was so ready to leave home. I went off to college and I would visit, and my parents kept saying, you can stay in, here's your room. And I'd say, no, that's the guest room. I did not want to live with my parents. And my kids have come and gone as adults. They're gone at the moment, but housing costs are so expensive. And earning ability of young adults is not what it was. I earned nothing when I was done with college, but nothing went a longer way in those days, so I could live on ramen noodles and I could fill my car up for like $2, so you could do things like that in those days. My heart goes out to the kids trying to make it today. It's not as easy.
And from some more of the questions, and pretty much this one's pretty universal, but in what ways is adolescent love, like first love, different from lasting love?
Well, it was again, this all sort of happened organically in the book, but I realized, I didn't realize Rainey was going to have her first love when I started writing this book. That just sort of evolved. But I started seeing it was 3 generations. It was Ruth and Danny, and then it was Maddie and Kyle, and then it was Rainey and I think his name is Matt. And obviously, each generation relates to their first love in a very different way. With Ruth, they were in the rock band, and she had the crush, and he was dating other people, and he had the van. I will not go into detail about what used to happen in vans in the 60s, but he had a van. We'll leave it at that. Whereas, Kyle and Maddie, Kyle had a Jeep. It's a whole different world, but they dealt with their first love in a very different way. It wasn't even like a crush. It was like they were like soulmates from the age of 3 on, or whatever it was when they first met. And Rainey's whole relationship is this sort of texting, mysterious, he said this, she said, is he talking about someone else, and misleading, and which it seems to be the more of the way young people today kind of communicate or miscommunicate or whatever, just different kinds of game playing. But I do think those first loves are really passionate and really important. And in some cases they last, but they don't always. They're again, they're a very intense fire, and I don't know how long that fire can burn at that intensity before somebody gets burnt, or the fire dies out. It runs out of fuel. I tried to depict Ruth and Barry's marriage as a good, solid one. I heard from one of my nieces she's been married now about 18 years now, I guess. And she thought Barry was an idiot. I said, well, you love your husband, see what he's like in another 20 years, and then we'll talk. But, there's a comfort level, there's an understanding level. Barry exasperates Ruth a lot of the time, and I'm sure she exasperates him too, although we're not in his point of view. But there's a comfort level. It's a different kind of love, and it's just as valid a kind of love, but it is different. I don't think Maddie ever loved, and I hate to say this, I'm blanking on the guy's name, her fiance. He was safety for her, but I don't think she loved him. I think she felt she could control him, and that made him safe. She could not control Kyle. I mean, he's another thing. I did not want him to come back into her life and turn out to be a lawyer or an accountant or something really proper. I wanted him to. I was very happy to learn from him that he was running a bar. That just but that's part of his charisma. That's part of, he's a bad boy, and Maddie is probably the kind of woman who's always going to be attracted to a bad boy, and I guess better the bad boy who fathered her daughter than some other bad boy. So, they're very different kinds of love. I had as a kind of a contrast, I had Noah's and Laura's marriage, and is it falling apart or is it going to be saved? Laura struck me as a very, very solid, grounded person who knew what she wanted and who wasn't going to take shit from anyone. And I think, this is just me projecting, I think they will get back together again and be okay, but she will have Noah under her thumb because she was a tough, I really liked Laura, I must say. I really liked her. I liked the fact that she could go into a restaurant and get that big turkey club sandwich and 2 glasses of wine and onion soup and not feel a pang of guilt about it. I really like that about her. So, there are a lot of different love relationships in the book. Not, romantic love relationships as opposed to parental love relationships. And, you know, I had a lot of fun seeing how they played out and how they contrasted with each other.
I feel like that's what also makes the book so relatable, that there's so many kind of different levels of love and that you can kind of see it at all stages, like Ruth looking back in her life and like right now in moment in time with Ruth and her daughter and her granddaughter, and like seeing the generational differences too is really interesting.
Yeah, I had fun with that. You know, I for years I wrote a lot of romance novels, and they always tended to feature heroes and heroines in their 20s and 30s falling in love. It was always first love. Sometimes it was a reunion type of love, so it wasn't quite the first love. They were coming back to each other, whatever. But it was really, really fun to write from the perspective of a woman in her 60s looking back and realizing what, I mean, and at the end, I think she realizes what love is too, that love of her in her marriage, that, you know, she sees that Danny has found that kind of love too. He's found this wonderful, sturdy New England Yankee lady who's, you know, who knows how to put together shelves and, and he seems to be very happy and content in his relationship too. It was a nice sort of symmetry. I think both, you know, he was very excited to see Ruth. She was excited to see him. And then they both knew at the end, this is not where I belong. You know, Ruth knew she had to go back, and she knew where she belonged.
I have a question that I want to hear what the readers have to say first, and then I want you to follow it up. So for Barry and Ruth, they clearly had their relationship change over the years. Do you think that by the end of the book, their marriage is stronger or weaker? Anyone can jump in here.
All those dark images there.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, then all yours, Judith.
I think Ruth is in a much stronger place at the end of the book. I think she will probably still occasionally indulge in her little fantasies, but the biggest fantasy of them all was the Danny fantasy. And now she knows that was never going to happen. And it's probably just as well that it was never going to happen. Sort of like my finding out that my wild and crazy passionate love turned into a college professor. Yawn. But I'm sure he was fine college professor. But I think she comes back to the marriage with a lot more self-knowledge, a lot more understanding of how she is the way she is, how she got to where she is, and that in turn would make the marriage stronger. I think she probably, because she is in a stronger place, she is less likely to tolerate any nonsense that Barry throws at her. But I think that's going to make for a better marriage too, because she's not going to ever be resentful. I mean, I could see her coming back and saying, all right, Barry, get the knee replacements because I'm tired of being on top. You know, we're gonna fix this sex life a little so that I don't always have to be on top because your knees are hurting you. And that, I think that would strengthen their marriage. I think, I think she will be more confident in herself, more assertive, just a stronger person, and that's going to be good because Barry's a pretty strong guy. I mean, he can take it. He'll be a better person for it.
You know, one of the themes that I found you explored in a really inspired way in this novel was that the difference between contentment and settling. You know, that they are not equivalent.
No.
And that's and often I think that people fight against the lives they have because they feel like they are equivalent. And that's an unfortunate mistake.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Lou, you can explain the rest of the book too. You're doing good.
Well, and we see Ruth change like very obviously throughout the novel, but do you think Barry has changed in the like from what's going on with Ruth, or do you think Ruth is going to make him change now to kind of cater to her more and not not exactly ignore, but like not kind of overlook their relationship as much? Do you think that's going to change as a result of Ruth or over Barry's own personal accord?
I think it's going to change because of Ruth. I think he's going to see changes in her. I think she is going to keep writing songs and she is going to start sharing them with him. And he is going to be stunned because he is not aware of that whole part of her life, which happened before he entered her life. I think he's going to see new things in her. She's in a period of transition. She's just retired from her job. This is her first few months of retirement, and she's still going to be finding her footing there. But I think she's grown a lot, and she has literally found her voice again, singing and writing new songs, writing songs from the perspective of a 68-year-old woman. And I think she's going to stop waiting till everybody's out of the house when she sings. I think she's going to start sharing her singing with them, and that may change him. I hope for the better. I hope he says, "Oh, wow, you sound so great." He will, because she does.
Did you plan for her to be a singer when you made her last name Singer?
And that was just a really funny thing. I knew she was a singer. I knew she'd been in a rock band. And just a quick aside, if you haven't read the acknowledgement, yes, I was in a rock band and in high school. I was the only woman in the band, the only girl. But one of the guys in the band has since transitioned and is now a woman. So if you read it and you wonder why there's another woman's name there, we are still very good friends. And our drummer, in fact, does not play in a wedding band in Boston, but is the drummer of the rock band, the Brooklyn Bridge, which some of you may have heard of. I mean, he was not in the original Brooklyn Bridge because we were all kids when the original, but he is now Louis Agesta. He is a professional drummer, and Emma, who was the guy who transitioned, was a music teacher for years and has a PhD in music. I majored in music in college. So, and the fourth guy, I just cannot find. He's lurking somewhere with Lou's first love, and we cannot find him. But anyway, so what was your question now? The singer, the name Singer, that was just so bizarre. It's, again, my characters come to me and they introduce themselves and they tell me who they are. And she said her last name was Singer. And I just said, "You're gotta be kidding," but that was her name. And so I did put that, some comment in the book. I had Rainey making a remark about that. So it was not a deliberate choice on my part. It was imposed on me by the character. So.
Another big question is, what is the significance of the turret room in the house that Ruth and Barry didn't buy?
The turret room, and again, the house, my if only house did not have a turret room. The house I live in does not have a turret room. A turret room does not have to be in a turret, but the turret room is the room where mom goes when she is done. I saw these as, two sides of the same coin. You go to the turret room, what Virginia Woolf called a room of one's own. Even if you're not a writer, I think every woman needs a room of her own. I have such sympathy for women who don't have a place they can call their own. I mean, I have my office here. The door was almost always open and my kids could come and go as they needed to. And My gonzo child used to need to do his homework on the floor of my office every day after school. He did the homework, kid's brilliant, but he had to be on the floor of my office, fine. But it's still my place. My husband is not allowed to go into the closet. He keeps saying, I would like to organize your closet. And I tell him to get the hell out of here. He is not allowed in my closet. I'm sitting in that room right now, and because of the position of my computer, you cannot see what is going on my desk. But I can tell you there's a whole menagerie of stuffed animals. There's a pile of books about this long of old print editions of thesauruses. And because I love to thumb through thesauruses. There's all kinds of things. Here's one of my little guys. It's my little penguin. It's my hand. I have some sculpted frogs that used to belong to my sister. She liked frogs, and when she died, I took some of her frogs. I have all kinds of things here, but it is my little space. And yeah, there are times that you just want to escape from those tentacles of family. You know, again, you cannot stop being a mom, but maybe you can close the door on being mom for a short period of time. And that's what the turret room is. I think every woman needs that. If you don't have it in your house, you tie on your sneakers and become a jogger so you can get away from, you know, people say, oh, don't you want to walk with other people? Don't you want to jog with other people? No, I just want to be alone. So that's what the turret room is, that protected space that and probably men need it too. I'm sure everybody needs their own space in some way. I mean, they have their man caves or whatever, and you know, they can watch. I don't know, what do they watch? Pro wrestling or whatever. I don't know. A lot. Well, this past month, a lot of basketball is what they could watch. A lot of basketball. My husband goes and watches his basketball, and I shut myself up with my little stuffed animals and write books.
That actually reminds me of a funny little editorial conversation that we had about in the novel, because the husband was always watching football, and I said to Judith, you know, you can't watch football every night, and she actually showed me that it is possible to watch football every night.
I know. I told my husband
college
that
football going on.
There is always, they have reruns, they have classic games, there's always something on ESPN2 or some college network or whatever. I told my husband you would question that, and he said, what's wrong with that man? He doesn't know this. You know, doesn't every man know this?
Now I do.
Now you do? What you learn from your writers, huh?
I'm not sure if any of the readers have any questions, but if anyone has any questions and they want to hop in with them, I came up reading the book or any time during this conversation. Well, if any come up, feel free to pop in. I did want to ask, what fantasies would you have written in that, like, were there fantasies that you thought about writing in, but you couldn't have really come to terms with them, so you kind of avoided putting them in? Was there anything like that came up while you were writing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did mention the one about if only Maddie had not existed, which was that one, and the idea of the being tall and thin. That I will admit. I mean, there's a lot of me in this book, and we go to the Jersey Shore every summer for a vacation. And I sit on the beach, and they're girls, I guess they're probably late teens, college age or whatever. And they are all just like built like models. They have these long, long legs and long straight hair. And I look at them and I say, what would their life? I mean, I think it's part of being a writer. You just always try to imagine what other people's lives are like, because you think these are characters in the grand novel that is your environment surrounding you. But you know, I always wonder, what would it be like to have that kind of beauty and be, you know, and so I thought about writing a fantasy, like what would her life have been like if she didn't feel like she was short and, a runner-up to Danny's, that bitchy girl that Danny dated in high school, whose name escapes me right now, but who was so beautiful. And so that was one. I wrote an entire fantasy, which I then cut, about if thinking that Ruth fantasizes that she's a great cook. And it was right around the Thanksgiving scene. And then I realized, wait, she is a good cook. So that's not going to be originally she was not going to be a good cook. And as she's was struggling to, pass off pies, store-bought pies as her own or whatever, she had this fantasy about being this magnificent cook. And the reason I got rid of that one was, again, I didn't feel there was a real conscious choice. Because if you choose to become a good cook, that's a pretty easy thing to do. You can take some lessons, you can read a recipe book, you can practice, you can botch a few things and then eventually figure out how to make them right. And so it didn't seem like a really interesting fantasy for me, for Ruth, because again, I thought it made more sense for her to know how to cook, to be a pretty decent cook. And especially because, her mother was not a cook. Her mother was not a very domestic woman. And my mother was not either. So I did a lot of the cooking when I was growing up. And I'm not a great cook, but I sure know how to make a hamburger. I mean, I know how to fix a meal, because I often fixed meals when I was growing up. And it just sort of made sense to me that Ruth would have picked up a few things too. So that was a fantasy that I actually wrote the whole scene and then cut it. And Lou said, "Oh, save it. Maybe you'll use it for a promotional thing or something." I don't think we ever did, but
Deleted scenes.
yeah, whatever. Yeah, delete. Yeah, exactly. In the bonus reel and at the end of the movie, we can use that. But yeah, there were some others. I struggled a bit with the skiing fantasy. I wasn't sure what to do with that originally. And again, she could have chosen to learn how to ski, which would make it a choice, which would make it the right kind of fantasy. But I realized as I was working on it that part of the thing about skiing, and I have been skiing once in my life, I enjoyed it, but I came home black and blue all over, and realized I was a teenager, and I realized I could not afford it. It was just too expensive a sport for me at that point. So I just never got into it. My son is the Gonzo son, of course. He is a maniac skier. He loves skiing. But as I was exploring that fantasy, I realized that there were several issues. One was that to be a good skier, you really have to have confidence in your body, in your body's ability to do things, and your balance. You have to be kind of fearless. And through a lot of the book, Ruth is sort of a fearful person until at the very end when she says, "That's it, I'm going to Vermont." That's sort of like her throwing off her inhibitions and her fears. I'm going to really do what I've hesitated to do my whole life. And so as I was writing the skiing fantasy, I realized what it was really about was her fantasizing that she would be that fearless, that she could just strap on some skis and go down a mountain and have that balance and have that exhilaration from doing something a little bit dangerous. So, yeah.
And if no one else has any questions, I'm just gonna ask one more to wrap up. Do you think that looking back on your life and asking if things would be different and kind of like rationalizing your choices, do you think that the way that Ruth did it is a positive approach to kind of deciding whether your life turned out okay, or more of a negative approach?
I think it's probably a little of both. I think when you look back, looking back always carries risks. You're always going to end up feeling some regrets about things. I had a teacher in high school, one of my favorite teachers of my whole life, and he always said, "You never have to feel shame in your life. The way you never have to feel shame is never do anything that you would be ashamed of." And I mean, it sounds like a truism, but it's sort of makes sense. You know, if you don't do things that you're going to regret, then you won't have any regrets. But we don't always know going in whether we're going to have a regret. You know, I didn't know when I told that boyfriend of mine that I would not run away with him. I didn't know whether I would be regretting that years and years later. I don't. It was the right choice, but sometimes it takes you 20 or 30 years to realize that. And I think, you know, I think it's impossible not to look back sometimes. You know, if you've had a relative suffering from senile dementia and you listen and talk to them and they talk all about things that happened 40 years ago or 60 years ago, and they remember them so vividly. And I don't think I have dementia. It's questionable sometimes, but I do think that there's probably some innate impulse in humans to look back. And sometimes what we're doing is we're looking back to see how far we've come, which is a very positive experience to say, wow. Or sometimes you look back and say, I actually, you know, I'm looking back at that the road I took, as the poem would have it, and wow, I really did manage to climb over that rock. I managed to climb that mountain. I managed to avoid falling off that cliff. And it gives you, it's a kind of an empowering feeling to, you know, I look back at some of the really dark times in my life and say, I'm still standing, you know, we got through it. I got through it, and I'm stronger because of it. So for the most part, I think looking back is empowering, but, you know, sometimes you do sort of say, I'm ashamed that I did that one thing. You know, my English teacher in high school was right. I should never have done that, so I would not experience shame. It's got pros and cons, but I think it's something we can't avoid doing. So we do it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, thank you so much. This has been so great. I loved hearing about all the little backgrounds of everything.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming and listening. I hope you enjoyed the book, and I'll probably see some of you next month or the next time we have another book club session, because
Yes,
I
end of
enjoyed
May.
Okay. Good.
Thank you, Barbara. It was great.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.